Men are good, as are you.
Men are good, as is Janice. Take it away, Janice.
Thank you, Don. I'm Janice Fiamengo. I'm here with Tom Golden, Don Lofendale, and Mike Buchanan, and we are going to discuss men and abortion. And as we all know, men have been told since forever that abortion is a women's issue, that it is a crucial human right for women without which they cannot participate equally in civil society. And men have been told that their only position is to support women in their demand for that right and to agree that this is a private decision that the woman has full rights to make. So, we want to speak about the various ways that abortion is a men's issue, both on the personal level and on the wider societal level. So, I'm just going to introduce our two special guests today, both of whom have spent a lot of time thinking about abortion and thinking about men's issues. Don Lofendale is a retired lawyer who has practiced in Canada, and he's been involved in our international conferences on men's issues. In 2020, he talked about towards a legal theory of equality. That's, of course, his special area of expertise. And then in 2021, he spoke about abortion in relation to men with Mike Buchanan. And Mike is a veteran of men's issues. He's a longtime organizer, co-organizer with Paul Elam of the International Conference on Men's Issues. And he is also the leader of the UK political party, the Children and Family Party. So, welcome to you both. Really interested in having a discussion about this issue that is, to say the least, underrepresented in our society. So, and I find also, just that's not my turn yet, I know, but I find it so disappointing that conservative men. I mean, we know that progressive men are just purely. It's not my right to speak, and this is a women's issue, and I'm pro-choice. But conservative men too, I find are in general just as bad, just as unwilling to really discuss the issues honestly, very enthusiastic about the idea of men's responsibilities, but silent on many other pertinent issues. So certainly silent on the idea of men's rights. Okay, well, so I think we'll start then with Dawn, and we're going to kind of go around the circle first and then have a more open discussion.
Thank you so much, Janice, and pleased to be here, of course, on your and Tom's shows, and always good to speak with Mike. It's a basic fact of human anatomy that creating a human life is a two-person project, one man, one woman, and not merely a one-woman process. Women do not create a human life by themselves. Once a life is created, which is at the very least at some point, once it's in the woman, I hesitate to necessarily call her the mom, um, that life has started. It it seems to me more than passing strange that a man is required to create a human life. A man is required for a pregnancy, and he can have 18 to, in Canada, I've seen cases up to 26 years old child of the marriage for which the man still has to pay, even if the pregnancy was unplanned and unwanted on his part. But somehow, magically, for 9 months, he's an entire stranger to the process. And he's made a stranger so that women can, as they politely put it, euphemistically put it, terminate the pregnancy. I think more honest, accurate people would say, kill the baby. So there's a very illogical gap here. This does, of course, raise the question as to when human life begins. And I do believe one of the reasons that I like the life side better than the so called choice side or pro abortion side is that we're much more nuanced. There's a bit of an issue where life begins, but I don't think much of one. Some people would say at the moment of conception. That makes a lot of sense. I would be inclined to say just slightly after that. I would say when the fertilized egg adheres to the uterine wall, because not only then is all the DNA material there, because it's a fertilized egg, the life is starting to grow once it adheres to the wall.
Hmm.
It starts to grow. One of the effects of this slight distinction is that it makes the uh, intrauterine device a birth control device, not an abortion device, because the eggs still can get fertilized with that method of birth control, but it can't adhere to the uterine wall.
Hmm.
But I think that sort of nuance is valid, whereas on the pro abortion side, you literally get to the point, as is currently the law in my formerly wonderful country, that if big toe is still inside mom, it's open season on baby. So, I mean, that's clearly preposterous, much more preposterous than saying life begins early. Once that life has begun, there are three lives that have a special interest in that life. It seems to be number one is the separate life itself, or more at the point, himself or herself. Uh, and then mom, of course, but also dad. So there's three humans that have a special interest in that life, not just one. Uh, so the notion that somehow this is a female only issue doesn't withstand the most basic scrutiny. It seems to me that abortion is a legitimate issue for men on both the personal and societal level. When a woman chooses to kill a baby, Tom, point one, she isn't merely killing her baby, she's killing the man's baby too. Point two, uh, men suffer the loss of their baby. It's a terrible loss, and they can grieve for a long, long time. Point three, the killing is not due to illness or accident, which is tragic enough, but yet which would be tragic enough, but yet the dad is unable to save his baby's life. Horrible helplessness. The little being is right there in front of him, and there's nothing he can do. And the killer is the person he loved, or at least desired enough to make love with, have sex with, and nothing he can do. Horrible place to be.
Amen.
Sometimes women go back and forth. She's gonna, she's not gonna, she's gonna, she's not gonna. They say women have a great moral dilemma. With 62 million abortions in the states since Roe, so that's in 49 years, it's a little hard to believe that's the case. But what I know is the case is that they kind of go back and forth, and it's not sure it's some great moral debate. It's how they feel on any given any given day, but that can really be torture for the men. Thanks, Tom. Uh, Point five: some men have psychological pain for years later, pretty much for a lifetime. One man talked about the horrible guilt he had in driving his girlfriend to the abortion clinic. That was his only role. He thinks of the abortion killing every year on its anniversary and thinks about how old his child would be that year.
Mm-hmm.
A man suffers a lifelong loss when a woman kills his baby, although maybe it's better to say their baby, but she's not viewing it as a baby. I know a guy who did impregnate kind of a woman in not a great relationship. She was he would say, a bit or a lot crazy, but he was more on the life side, and she was going to have the abortion after going back and forth a lot. And she would have had it, but he wouldn't drive her to the mortuary. And his child ended up being the best thing that ever happened to him. Had to deal with a lot of crazy for a lot of years, but his son's wonderfulness over was greater than her craziness by far. And so just by that simple choice, he saved a life and created a wonderful life, and had a great life with his child. So that is all good. Going Number six, going back to the beginning for a moment, this incredible contradiction that his crucial role in creating the life is only acknowledged post birth if a woman wants money from him. If she doesn't want the child, she will sometimes give the child up for adoption without telling the guy. And there's been at least one case in Canada I know where the man found out after the fact. I guess I don't know if it was casual sex or they had broken up, but he tried to get his baby. He wanted his baby, and the judge said, no, it's been whatever it was, 6 months or 8 months. So the adopting couple has bonded with the baby, so go away. Could you imagine saying that to a woman who somehow whose baby was stolen away from her? The twistedness of the logic on the um, pro-abortion side is remarkable to me, because rather than saying, men create a baby too, maybe they should have some rights when it's Huntress Hamer, as we say in her mum, they say men are 100% responsible for every abortion. Like that's how they acknowledge that a man is needed to create the life. It's uh, remarkable. But this, of course, is only on the personal level. There is the societal level as well. Men are often called upon to risk themselves physically and otherwise to protect the vulnerable. There's even a big feminist push in the last while for men to come to a woman's rescue who's a stranger if her date or husband or boyfriend is appears to be giving her a rough time in public, even though she's supposedly a strong, competent equal. But surely a baby is much more vulnerable in his mom, and the power and strength gap is much greater between a pregnant woman and the child she's carrying than a man and a woman. So it seems to me it's got to be the case that if the feminist point has any validity about men's duty to them, it's even stronger to the baby. And of course, contrary to the feminist oppressive hierarchy uh, narrative, in real life with real people, one can be a victim in one circumstance, a woman beaten by her husband for no reason, and a victimizer in some other case down the line, maybe with a different man, to want to kill one's baby to evade like even 9 months of responsibility, which is, of course, only 1/24th the length of time of the minimum responsibility of 18 years that men get. I also think, and I know this is a loaded phrase, but I think real men do have to show some courage, or should. At our traditionally masculine best, we do risk ourselves to protect those that are vulnerable and weak. And it bothers me enormously that so many men, side with the relatively powerful woman than the highly vulnerable baby. It's easy to stand with with women. They have loud voices. They're listened to, virtually obeyed. The baby can't defend itself. It can't speak. That's standing with the powerful, certainly relatively powerful, against the incredibly vulnerable. So I do say shame on those men. That is just, uh, uh, well, I would say it's cowardly. I would go that far. Certainly an absence of courage at the very least. These men, I think, might be worthy of some respect if they at least had the courage or integrity to say, well, somehow, this is me speaking now, somehow they don't believe that a separate human life is a separate human life, but so that it's okay to end the life early, at least early in the pregnancy. But since it took two to create, if it's going to be a choice, it needs to take two to destroy. If one parent is prepared to take the child, how is that not enough to save a child's life? Even with the choice theory, so both or neither should have some choice. But these men, of course, won't do that. They just fall all over themselves, saying it's her choice. Of course, if the choice is life, then it's also her choice to get 18 to 26 years of maintenance in which she has no say, again, even if the pregnancy was unplanned or unwanted, or even if she lied to him. Seems to not matter. The Well, it pales in comparison to the choice of life or death if those men would at least say, look, men need to be able to reject parenthood the way females do as well post birth. A woman, as Janice pointed out earlier, can give a baby up for adoption, and there's no um, expectation, there's no shame that she doesn't raise the kid or financially support the child. So surely men, if they have no other choice, should at least have that choice to be able to non-violently walk away. As things stand now, women don't even have to tolerate even 9 months of unwanted responsibility, even though the only way to evade that responsibility is to kill. But men somehow aren't allowed to walk away from 18 years minimum, 24 times as long as 9 months of responsibility, non-violently. So again, the illogic and the contradiction is fairly preposterous. And these men, these allies, they're so weak and so frightened and so cowardly that they won't even say that much. And how could you possibly have or advocate for less of a right than that for men? Doesn't affect your choice issues at all. So shame on them. Um, I think, though, what it is in part is that, as I have personally, these men find standing up to women the hardest thing to do in life. Of all the things I've done in life that have frightened me, which included a few parachute jumps, they were just static line, not free fall. Of public speaking, especially with the stutter, and standing up to women. Number one by far is standing up to women, no question. Hardest by far. But we have to reach down and be men and develop some courage, especially when what the feminist side or the pro abortion rights side is saying is clearly illogical and contradictory and one sided, and anything but equality, anything but principled. Uh, of course, one of the horrible things, too, is that where the contradictions grow large is that if with radical choice that is not only one-sided but for a considerable amount of time into the pregnancy rather than a pretty brief time at the front end, you can have the truly preposterous situation where one operating room is killing a baby, whereas the next operating room with a baby at exactly the same point in development is getting medical treatment and being saved, depending on whether or not the woman wants the baby. And by that, and how they characterize that is whether or not she feels it is her baby. So to say that a baby is a baby or an unwanted bit of biological material, goddesses women, they can transform life to not human life to something in the nature of a wart, depending on how they feel. And that's very dangerous. I mean, people were given that kind of power, male, female, in anybody. Very few people can behave well with that kind of power. And it doesn't tend to just stay in the one area that they're given power. Yeah, we see it now, like in sex, where everything might be rape if she feels that way, like 20 years after the fact, even. So this goddessing makes women bad human beings that they wouldn't be otherwise in many, many cases, and makes them dangerous human beings, obviously for the baby, but also for any man that happens to cross their path. And then finally, the final societal dimension, it seems to me, is this, or two last points, if I might. Coming back to the very beginning, it seems to me, from the point of conception and adhesion to the uterine wall, the minimum we have there is a separate human life. I don't think there's any reasonable debate about that. It might not be a person, or wouldn't even be a person till later in the process, but it's never anything less than a separate human life. I think, too, finally, on the societal level, we need to look at the cumulative effect. And with 62 million abortions in the States, as I mentioned, during the 49 years of Roe, um, with minimum 90 to 95% of them being choice abortions, that is not to save the mother's life, not because of rape or incest, or not because of gross deformity, that the choice dimension is like totally out of whack. And the effect of that, well, that would be then, depends how one measures it, 56 to something a bit less than 62 million choice abortions, has the effect of aborting American society and culture out of existence. Women are literally aborting their society out of existence. And it seems to me that is not a question of personal morality, and it's beyond a men's issue in that it's everybody's issue at a societal level. The total cumulative effect of all of this killing. And thank you so much. That's what I have to say.
Very good. Very good. Well, I guess I'm supposed to go next. And I have a bit of a different angle. You know, years ago, and for years, I saw men who were traumatized. And one man who was dealing with old issues brought up this whole deal with his wife wanted an abortion. He didn't want the abortion. And his process and his telling me what was going on for him really opened my eyes. And to see that, wait a minute, we've got a problem here. Because, like Don said, I mean, you can't make a human being without both. She may have the oven, but you had the special ingredient that started the thing cooking to begin with. So you can't just cut that person out of the whole process. And so it just opened my eyes to seeing things. And I started looking into it. And it turns out there's actually been quite a bit of research done on men and abortion that very few people know about. In fact, I've spoken at 2 or 3 national conferences on men and abortion, which were not thousands of people going, but they got 200-300 people. And so it's been going on. This whole investigation has been going on for a while, but because our culture is so gynocentric and so focused on women, guess what? No one hears about it. The media doesn't touch it. No one knows anything. So let me just kind of summarize a little bit about what the research has said. You know, men suffer emotional trauma following the abortion. That's a general statement you can make that I think the research will support. Men suffer emotional trauma following the abortion. Men note the lack of empathy. Almost all the studies, men said, no one gives a crap about me. No one really cares about what's going on for me. Men do not see abortion as easy or without stress. The general trend is to say, oh, men doesn't bother them. They're fine. There's not really a problem. But that's not true. When you ask men in research studies, was this easy or was it without stress? They'll say the same thing. This was something that was tough. This was not something that was a simple on or off. Men can have disturbing thoughts afterwards. That's another thing the research points out, is that afterwards, men can be disturbed by this. And it impacts their role as men. Impacts their role as men, just the abortion does. And all the emotions that they have, these are the ones that you saw most often in the studies: anxiety, anger, guilt, regret, helplessness, and sadness. A lot of grief for men going through this kind of thing. And when have you ever heard about this? When have you ever seen that in the newspaper? You probably haven't seen much at all. And, let me just give you a couple of ideas about the specific studies and some of the things they said. 20% of men thought it contributed to their relationship failure. So their relationships failed, and 20% of the men said it was because of the abortion. 44% reported dreams about the baby. Wow. 50% reported depression. 9.3% said abortion did not affect them. That means 90-point-something% said it did affect them. 50% said relationship was negatively affected. 15.6% blamed the abortion for ending their relationship. That's pretty intense. 51% reported regret. 33% had a longing for the baby. Now, the other thing they found out was that sometimes this abortion thing can stimulate old issues from their own childhood. So that was another theme that popped up every now and then. And Rue and Coyle, Vincent Rue and Catherine Coyle, are the two researchers that have been working on this for years. And one of their studies came up with the salient themes identified were loss and grief, helplessness and or victimization, and spiritual healing. One of the things they found was that men, after the abortion, even when they didn't agree with the abortion, the men didn't want the abortion, the woman did, the men were still able to and wanted to help their wife and support their wife. What a beautiful thing, men could forgive enough to be able to chip in and want to help her, even though they had this huge life or death struggle before that. So, men are good. Men are good. That's enough from me. Janice, are you going to say something?
I think Mike is going to go next.
Oh.
I was just going to note, Tom, that my head seems to have been enlarged.
Janice,
exponentially.
Are you growing on us?
I didn't touch. I didn't really.
It's all your fault, Janice.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
It's quite startling.
Oh well.
Thank you, Tom. That was.
God bless technology and God bless Tom.
Yeah. So
So Mike's next.
From Mike next.
All right.
Okay, thank you, Janice and Tom. And I must say, it's a pleasure and an honour, as always, to be on the same platform as you guys. I'm pro-life, and I believe the state should protect the right of the vulnerable to live, not protect the right of the powerful to kill the vulnerable. But I lead a political party, and politics is the art of the possible. Proposals in our manifesto centre on reducing the number of unwanted pregnancies and reducing the elective term limit for abortion from 24 weeks, when many unborn children could be saved today, a point Don was making, I think, to 13 weeks. There comes a point when the basic right to life of an unborn child must override the rights of a woman to kill it. One person's rights end where another person's rights begin. We live in an age when contraception has long been readily available and highly reliable, so you have to ask why almost half of pregnancies, in the UK at least, are unplanned. I'm not religious, but it seems obvious to me that human life starts at conception. That's just a biological reality. Conception is the point in time when an entity with the potential to become a fully independent human being starts, a process that will take many years, far longer than just the 9 months of pregnancy. And of course, half of the child's DNA comes from the father, half from the mother. The fact that fathers have no right to prevent the killing of their own unborn children is obviously a major human rights violation, which I think Don spoke about very eloquently. The 1967 Abortion Act in the UK in practice allows elected abortions on demand, up to 24 weeks. Abortions require only the signatures of 2 doctors and they're readily forthcoming. We can squarely lay the blame of the act on men, because at the time, 96% of MPs were men. Needless to say, there was no mention of a proposed abortion act in any party manifesto. It was introduced through the back door as a private member's bill by an MP not even in the government party. When it comes to abortion, men have abandoned their historical role of protecting the weak and vulnerable with utterly disastrous consequences. And what has been the outcome of giving women a license to kill? In the UK, over 10 million unborn children have been killed in the UK since the passing of the Act 55 years ago. The abortion rate and numbers of abortion have been rising steadily in the UK, and the latest annual figure was a record, over 215,000. The World Health Organization, very keen on killing unborn children, as we know, estimate that there are upwards of 73 million unborn children killed every year globally.
Mm.
Let's call this out for what it is. It's state-sanctioned and mainly male taxpayer-funded genocide on a scale the world has never seen before. The abortion debate boils down to one thing only at the end of the day, and that's power. Should women have the power to have their unborn children killed if there's no significant physical risk to the woman's life if the pregnancy continues, which is a rare risk, by the way? I don't think they should. It's a right they should never have been given. The issue of potential harm to the mental health of the mother is a complete red herring, but is one used to justify 99.9% of the elective abortions in the UK. There's plenty of evidence that having abortions carries out There's plenty of evidence that having abortions harms the mental health of many women, and we really shouldn't be surprised at that. Abortions, of course, also impact on the men who would otherwise have seen their children born. I'd like also to talk about a subject that attracts almost no public or media attention compared with abortion, but it should. And again, it's because of gynocentrism that it's not talked about. It's women drinking alcohol whilst pregnant, risking the possibility that the babies will suffer from fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, or FASDs. FASDs are the #1 cause of avoidable physical and mental health incapacitation across the developed world. A study in 2018 concluded that up to 1 in 6 babies born in the UK have been adversely affected by their mother's alcohol consumption during pregnancy. Women in the UK who drink alcohol during pregnancy face no punishment for the bodily harm they inflict on their unborn children. They are rarely prosecuted, in fact, even for killing their infants under 1 year of age. In stark contrast, men who harm or kill unborn or recently born children face severe consequences. We had a case recently in the UK where a 21-year-old man was prosecuted for allegedly trying to kill a baby by lacing her feed bottle with his anti-epilepsy drug. She made a full recovery, while the man received a 25-year prison sentence. You won't be surprised to know that I always have to say a few words about feminism. And it inevitably comes into this debate.
Indeed.
Now, of course, it's always been a movement aimed at increasing women's rights and privileges and reducing their responsibilities. So abortion has long been a cornerstone of feminist activism. Feminism is a death cult, among much else, and I think abortion will prove to be their Achilles heel. The human species has survived and thrived only because women have accepted historically their natural responsibility for caring for their unborn children. The total fertility rate, TFR, is the average number of children expected to be born per woman over her reproductive lifetime. According to the Office for National Statistics, TFR has plunged in the UK from 2.57 in 1968, the year the Abortion Act was implemented, by almost 40% to 1.58 in 2020, far below the replenishment rate. Finally, it may come as a surprise to some viewers on the abortion issue from women than from men. They're disinclined to get involved in heated public exchanges on social media and elsewhere. I can hardly blame them. But they're looking forward to voting for us at the next general election. Thank you.
All right.
Great. Thank you, Mike. Yeah, wow. I mean, there's a lot there to talk about already. And I guess I would just add a few amplifying comments, really. One is that I am so struck by the animus against men on this issue, no matter what side one takes, it seems. The enormous anger that gets expressed towards men, and the enormous willingness to exempt women from any kind of moral responsibility. We expect that on the progressive end of the scale, in which we are told that women are oppressed in a patriarchal society, and that men, in denying women, the right to abort their unborn children at any stage in the pregnancy, that is a form of patriarchal oppression. Well, we're all used to hearing about that. But I was shocked just recently to witness a group of conservative men, pro-life conservative men, and one pro-life conservative woman talking about abortion and doing the exact same thing, except from the other side, arguing that men force abortions onto women, either literally, a case was given of an abusive male partner who told his partner that, she had to get an abortion because he didn't want the child. And to listen to this woman talk about the issue, she said that the vast majority of abortions were coerced abortions, that men were forcing women to get these abortions. She obviously hasn't met all those feminists that like to shout their abortion and talk about it as a great good and a sacrament, or she thinks they're not really telling the truth about that, I suppose. The implication also was that even in cases where the woman wasn't actually coerced, she was coerced in some other way because she wasn't told about her options. She was fooled into thinking that this was something that she should do, that abortion was a good. And somehow women don't have any kind of independent agency or thought process to be able to think for themselves, that they might make a different kind of choice, and that they are pressured in all sorts of ways to do this thing that they don't really want to do. So all the emphasis in the discussion was on the harm to women of a culture in which they are given the choice and even celebrated for making the choice to kill their unborn children. I thought it was so bizarre, this unwillingness to call out the moral evil of a woman's choice to kill her baby, fully cognizant of what that means. The other thing, well, there was a whole discussion there too about how the sexual revolution had been won by men, and that it was making women feel bad, and for women, and men needed to step up and take their responsibility. I find the unwillingness on the part of pro-life conservatives to actually speak honestly about the discussion, and not to focus extensively always on harms to women. That's always the fallback position, it seems, no matter what side of the political scale one is on. I think that really stymies our ability to speak honestly about abortion and about many issues, of course.
Yes.
And yeah, just to amplify what's already been said about the notion of the female goddess, that idea of the power that we give to women to determine all sorts of things. We do it, as Dawn said, in the realm of sexual relations, where the exact same act, it no longer has any kind of objective meaning. It all depends on how the woman feels about the sexual act, whatever it happens to be, whether in the moment or, as Dawn said, 20 years later. It can become sexual assault or rape, depending on how the woman claims she felt about it at the time, or even how she feels about it in retrospect when she takes into account her alleged lack of agency. That is no way to organize a sane society, obviously. And in the case of abortion, it's even more serious. I mean, in the case of sexuality, it's very serious too, because many men end up in prison and having their lives destroyed as a result. But in the case of abortion, it's extraordinary that we're willing to say that a life is a life, depending on whether the woman feels and thinks that it is. And I remember speaking to a fellow academic about this issue, and she talked with great pride and pleasure about marching in a pro-abortion rights demonstration when she was heavily pregnant. And she felt this demonstrated, I don't know what, the complex thought process or broad-mindedness or something. And she said she got some quizzical looks from people. There she was with her big belly with a baby inside, but very energetically supporting women's right to kill their unborn children. And I felt very uncomfortable with it at the time, and I didn't really say anything back to her. And I wish I had said or pointed out that clearly if somebody had killed her unborn baby at 7 months or whatever point she was at in her pregnancy, she would have seen that as a horrific crime against her and certainly against the baby. Right. And yet she was perfectly fine with someone else killing a child and most feminists are pretty happy with no term limits. So 5 months, 6 months, 7 months, 8 months, right up until the week after birth, in some legislation that's being put forward in the United States, right, and probably elsewhere too. She probably supports that. She certainly supports the right of a woman to decide that a smaller baby is not worth saving and should not be saved because of the mother's choice. And so the logic of that and the clear implication that the woman is all powerful, that we recognize the woman as not only having the power over the life of the child, but actually having the power to determine whether that child is a human life or not. It's completely incoherent, and yet many people accept it as just a given. And so that's where I think a case actually has to be made. And I'm not the one to make it because it seems a very complex philosophical case, but that I think there is something to men's role in society, and this is their historical role from the beginning of human civilization, really, to determine moral law, to determine laws that have universal application. I've read a lot of feminist theory about women's allegedly different kind of morality, and feminists boast about this, that women have what they call a relational morality, or a relational ethics, or a situational ethics. And in other words, that, to oversimplify it, it all depends on the particular context, but what that boils down to often is that it all depends on the person's feelings, the woman's feelings, not the man's, in the situation. And that is very, very dangerous, and I don't see how any civilization can survive that in any kind of healthy way for very long. And that's really where we're at now, a feeling driven morality, and that is not a true morality. A baby cannot be a precious life in one circumstance and a inconvenient, collection of biological matter in another, depending on how the woman thinks about it. And so I think that, we really need to be able to reclaim men's role as lawmakers and as upholders of sane, generally applicable moral laws. And it's interesting that in my research in 19th century feminism, what I have discovered is so many things that have surprised me, but this one in particular, that women actually have a long history, feminist women have a long history of not caring about infant life. There are some estimates, of course, it's very difficult, but there are some estimates of mortality in, for instance, 19th century England that found that over half of all homicides were committed against persons under 1 year of age. In other words, these are infants that were killed, often killed within a week or 2 weeks of their birth, primarily by their mothers. Infanticide was a huge issue in the 19th century, and it was often, contrary to what we would all assume, often not prosecuted, because even all male juries were easily convinced that this woman had no other choice but to kill her child, or she was temporarily insane. In the case of unwed women, they just felt sorry for the woman. And in the case of married women, many married women killed their infants as well. They could use a plea of temporary insanity and usually escape jail time. And often feminists in those cases would take up the woman's cause if it happened. I mean, most of the time these cases didn't even go to trial, but if it did, often feminists would take up the woman's case and would turn it into, it was again a case of a woman who was victimized by a patriarchal society. They would try to claim that she had been raped, even if she hadn't been, even if there was absolutely no evidence for that. They would claim that no one would help her. She was in a terrible situation, et cetera, et cetera. They would blame the husband or any man who happened to be there and could be used for that purpose. So, it's this the ruthlessness of both the ruthlessness of feminist ideology, even at that early stage, in expressing no empathy for the babies killed and turning the issue into an issue of blaming of men and excusing women from moral agency. It's so familiar to see the language and the automatic positioning of those feminists. And it's certainly what convinces me that if we leave things up to feminists, after birth abortion will be firmly on the agenda of feminism in the future, and it will become something widely practiced, I fear. So again, that's to me a reason why this is really an important subject for men who value human life to speak up about. That's it, really.
Yeah, and let that be a leader to go see Janice's Fiamengo Files 2.0. You'll find out some fascinating things, but that's one I didn't know about, that they were so involved in killing babies early in the 19th century. That is absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, there's a really famous case concerning a woman named Hester Vaughan. And the feminists, the major feminist organization in the United States, led by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, they took up her cause and lied about the case. Turned it into a narrative that served feminist purposes, never spared a thought. This was a woman who, she became pregnant, she was unmarried, she planned, obviously, to kill her child because she didn't tell anybody that she was pregnant. She was living in a boarding house. Women noticed that she was obviously pregnant. They offered to help her. She refused their offers of help. She planned the killing of this child, and she did. Once the baby was born, she beat its brains out on the bedpost, and then hid it under the bed and claimed that she had fainted on the baby after it was born. And the feminists took up her cause and, said that this was a terrible case of a young woman victimized by patriarchy, essentially. There were, this was in Philadelphia, there were homes for orphan children. They'd already been established decades and decades before that. So she did have choices. Once she had that baby, she could have surrendered it to one of these homes. She chose not to. And yet, the feminists were enthusiastic in her defense, even not knowing anything really about the situation of the case and not concerned about the reality of what she had done or the morality of what she had done at all. And that was a common kind of instance. So we see that determination to excuse women of moral agency and really lack of interest in the value of that little helpless life. And this amongst ideologues who claim that we should give more powerful roles to women in society precisely because allegedly they have a superior morality and are more empathetic, more capable of deep feeling, more sympathetic to the helpless and the vulnerable. And they have shown in their actions over and over again that actually isn't the case at all. So just another reason why men should feel confident to speak up about this issue.
Yes, that's exactly what we need. We need men to stand up and say, no, that is not right. So, but unfortunately, go ahead, Mike.
Sorry, Tom. Yeah, I just like to have a thought on that. Almost all the men who engage with us on the abortion issue on Facebook and elsewhere are hostile to our party's position on abortion. And I can't help but think that's a manifestation of unconscious guilt about doing nothing about the killing of the defendant. It's their way, I think, of giving, I suppose, primacy to women's decisions. It absolves them somehow the responsibility for doing damn all about it.
Interesting.
And if I might, I'd like to pick up on Janice's point for one moment also, see if I can say this coherently. The men and maybe developing some universal moral concepts. I have noticed back in my workplace, I worked with a lot of female lawyers. A lot of them were good to work with, had some female work buddies, some of them very sharp lawyers. One of the things, though, that I noticed is they tended to be extremely good at picking up details, but not so good on vision. And the men tended to see the big picture better, but not the details. And it seems to me for something that should be universal, you need that vision. That also fits with your, if I can fit it in, Janice, with your point on universal morals. There's also the issue of where something immoral ought to become criminal, and the whole issue of violence. Tom would know this better than me, but I thought I'd read a number of places over the years that in intact families, it's dads that tend to put the limits on violence. A certain amount of roughhousing, okay. Beyond this point, no.
Correct.
And with dads being out of the homes and mostly out of lawmaking now, they're either not there or have to knuckle under, kowtow to the women. I wonder if this extreme view the pro-abortion writers have on abortion and the extreme number of choice abortions that have occurred is a manifestation of this, the absence of men and their ability and role of putting limits on violence. And we see the consequences of it, it seems to me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's right, Don. And I think that we are suffering the consequences now of having neutered men for the last 50 years and turning their strengths into toxic. Into something that's seen as toxic. I mean, the very strengths that could have been used with men to say no to this have been shamed so much that men are afraid to even, step up and be masculine. We're living in a crazy place, man. It's absolutely insane.
Yes.
But it is a quite recent development, I think, for the men's rights movement to say this is, you would think that, the men's rights movement would be many decades ahead of the curve. But it seems to me, I can't speak about North America, of course, but it seems to me that there is a growing realization that men have a legitimate interest in abortion, whereas 3 or 4 years ago, that would have sounded really quite fantastical. It was only in 2019 that abortion was first mentioned as a men's issue in an international conference on men's issues in Chicago.
By Mike Buchanan.
Yes.
Exactly.
And I think maybe a part of that, Mike,
I was really expecting some kickback on that, but I recall you were in the audience, Janice, which was wonderful. But I had nothing but support at the time, and 99% of the feedback I've had from men's rights activists, MRA, since has been supportive. They all said it was something whose time had come.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I remember that being an electrifying moment, actually, because it did seem that up until that point, abortion was just not an issue to be discussed. It didn't seem like a men's issue. Obviously, it is, as our discussion here has clearly shown, and as any logical investigation of the issue would show. But it just, it seemed as if well, there were a lot of other issues that we were concerned about, perhaps first, that
Yes.
presented as more obvious or more urgent, perhaps, but seemingly. But yeah, I agree that it's surprising that it was so much in the shadows for so long. And I'm just glad that we're finally now beginning to talk about it, because I think, at every level, as both Don and Tom showed, men who have no say whatsoever over the life of their unborn children, that's a horrible position to put human beings in. That is just a terrible thing. And the lack of societal empathy or even awareness that is an issue, it's extraordinary.
I mean, as always, if you do a gender switch, you get something quite interesting. What if only men could decide on women having abortions? Women had no say in it. That would be so extraordinary. And yet somehow we accept it the other way round without a murmur.
People would see it in the heartbeat. They'd see it in the heartbeat because they couldn't imagine women not being able to decide. It's just unimaginable.
Yeah, exactly.
We're living in a gynocentric world. Everything is filtered by that. Everything we see and do. It's crazy.
Yeah, and that wasn't so bad when women were in the home, because then you can see where they need protection. But once they claim to be strong, competent equals and get all kinds of benefits, they can get credit for raising your kids even though they're in the daycare center, and also be a doctor, lawyer, like whatever. But to then turn around and claim that, I kind of lost my train of thought, but that we have that they're strong. Once they're strong, competent equals, then that are getting all kinds of benefits and even have things like affirmative action programs, to then have a gynocentric society, that makes it toxic. So I think it went from being a good or at least justifiable thing to being a horrible thing, because of who women now claim to be and what else they're doing in the world.
Yes. Yeah, we've inflated women to such a degree that I think they're going to pop soon.
Yes.
It's like they're so inflated and they're so not held accountable for almost anything. That it's just, and this is just one more example of that very thing. It's just amazing to me.
Just along those lines, Tom, I sometimes think, forgive me, that a lot of women are suffering from high self-esteem.
Yes, and that's the inflation. That's the inflation, and it's the research even shows it. It just shows that that's what's happening. This inflation thing. It comes from not having fathers setting limits in the home. You don't have the father. The mothers always get, well, maybe this time we can do. No, the father said no, not until such and such. When you don't have that, what do you have? You have people who grow up without limits, and people who grow up thinking that they're just everything revolves around them. Ugh, that's trouble.
And that anything that they do wrong is not their fault.
It's not their
It's
fault.
somebody else's fault.
Yes, it's
So it's even
patriarchy.
worse than that in a way. You know, they're told that they're wonderful, that they're courageous, that they
Yep.
bring something that the other sex absolutely lacks.
Yep.
But then at the same time, any wrongdoing is the other sex's
Fault. Yes.
complete fault. And
Yes.
the moral, like the moral hazard of that, it seems
Yeah.
like it's so obvious, and I think we should be talking about that every day.
Yes.
If we want to talk about harms to women, that is, I think, the major harm. It is a moral harm to women's moral decency and agency, in that we are turning women into monsters. I think we are probably producing, various kinds of personality disorders and dysfunction merely through that, the unwillingness to force women to earn their own rights and identity, not rights, but their identity
Yes.
in the world. It's granted to them that they're wonderful, and yet when they show that they're not wonderful, there's a utter refusal on the part of most people to even name the wrong that's been done. And
Correct.
that is really doing a disservice to women.
Yes. Exactly. Right.
Yeah, exactly. Men are attributed no virtues and all vices, and then it's the reverse for women, right?
Well said, Don. That about sums it up. Are we close to finishing? Hello?
I think so.
We're going to leave a lot of links down below. So the description box is going to have links, all kinds of links. Links to Janice's 2.0 Fiamengo file, to Don's presentation on abortion, Mike's stuff, all kinds of things. I'll leave it also research links so you can read the research yourself and have a look at it. But and so there'll be a rich content down in the description box below. And I want to thank everyone for being here today. Don, Mike, Janice, what an interesting discussion, and thank you all for being here. It's been good.
Thanks a lot. That was
It's
really
been
good.
Any last words?
Oh, just thanks so much. It's been a delight and, of course, an honor.
Me too. Me too. So let's keep in mind, men
Are
Somebody say it.
good.
All right. Men are good. We'll see.
And so is Janice.
On that note, we'll see you. Men are good. Men are good, as are you.